Rebecca Haines here to lead us through today's event. It's an honor to be here because we are marking an important moment in the global conversation on gender equality. As a mom of both a boy and a girl, this is important as I want them both to achieve happiness and both be productive for society. Neither should be held back, kind of in deference to the other, right? So, right now, the United Nations is hosting its World Conference on Women, which happens every year. During this conference nearly 30 years ago, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action was laid out to advance gender equality and empower women and girls worldwide. It was a landmark achievement, and over the decades, we have seen remarkable progress. But if the promise was true gender equality, then something has been missing, and the proverbial pendulum has swung too far. Why, in our global efforts, have we so often overlooked the challenges facing men and boys? Why has gender equality been framed as a one-sided issue when in reality, fairness must extend to all? If the goal is equality, then we must ask, why are the struggles of men and boys so often just left out of the conversation? Most people who disagree that's happening would do so on an emotional level, but statistics and research are hard to dispute, and they reveal we're not making emotional statements as we introduce the New York Declaration for Men and Boys. It's a call to action that recognizes the profound but often ignored disparities affecting men across health, education, family life, the justice system, and overall well-being. The data are clear. Men account for 3 out of every 4 suicides worldwide, yet mental health resources remain primarily targeted for women. Boys are falling behind in education, with declining college enrollment rates and increasing disengagement from learning. Fathers often struggle for equal parenting rights, despite evidence showing, of course, the importance of parental involvement. Men receive harsher legal penalties for the same crimes and are often overlooked as victims of domestic violence and abuse. Workplace fatalities overwhelmingly affect men, yet discussions around workplace safety rarely focus on them, and these issues are not given urgency in policy discussions. Why? Because for too long, we've equated gender advocacy with focusing exclusively on women's struggles, rather than creating a truly inclusive vision of equality. The New York Declaration for Men and Boys isn't about competition, it's about completion. It's about ensuring that every individual, regardless of gender, has the opportunity to live with dignity, fairness, and purpose. Today, we'll explore why addressing male disadvantage benefits society as a whole, including women and families. We'll discuss real solutions, policy changes, cultural shifts, and commitments to ensuring that men and boys are seen, heard, and supported in meaningful ways. And with that in mind, let's begin this essential conversation. I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Lawrence DeMarco is Executive Manager of the International Council for Men and Boys, and he is here to give us the details on today's landmark declaration.
Today marks an historic moment. 30 years ago, the Beijing Declaration was a milestone for women's rights. It called on the world to recognize and address the disadvantages women face. Now, in 2025, we take another step toward true gender equality for all, which includes both sexes, men and boys as well. When fathers are empowered, wives and children benefit. And when we address the silent struggles that men face, we create a better world for everyone. Today, we launched the New York Declaration for Men and Boys, a commitment to ensuring that our fathers, sons, brothers, and husbands are supported, not at the expense of women, but alongside of them. We all know the value of gender equality, but for too long, one side of the equation has been overlooked. Around the world, men and boys face 12 critical areas of disadvantage, including education, health, parenting, and justice. Boys are falling behind in school, more likely to drop out, less likely to graduate, and less likely to continue their education. Men face shorter lifespans, higher suicide rates, and receive far less attention in health research. Fathers are too often sidelined in family law, despite research showing that children do best when they have both parents actively involved in their lives. Families are strongest when both parents, both sexes, are supported. The New York Declaration for Men and Boys is built on a simple principle. Gender equality should mean equality for all. In the wording of the document, we identify the common problems facing men and boys and propose solutions. The document is divided into 9 sections, which I'll now set forth individually. Number 1, physical health and well-being. We all want our loved ones to live long and healthy lives, but men's health is being neglected on a global scale. Men live on average 5 years less than women. This gap exists in nearly every country. Suicide rates among men are 3 times higher than among women. Despite these glaring statistics, most countries don't have dedicated offices of men's health. Women's health has received substantial focus, which is a great achievement, but we must extend that same care to men. This is why the New York Declaration calls for men to be equitably represented in health research. Too often, medical studies have been conducted without considering men's unique health risks, and the establishment of offices of men's health in governments worldwide. If women's health deserves specialized attention, so does men's health. Number 2, mental health and suicide prevention. We might suggest it's okay to not be okay, but for too many men, help is out of reach. Societal expectations tell men to be strong, push through, and never ask for help, but this silence is costing lives. Young men today face higher rates of addiction, depression, and deaths of despair. Yet most mental health outreach doesn't speak to men in ways that resonate with them. The Declaration calls for the following: promoting models of masculinity that embrace emotional well-being. Being strong shouldn't mean suffering in silence. Expanding male-focused mental health initiatives. We need resources and campaigns designated for men, by men, to reach those who need help the most. National suicide prevention efforts that address male suicide directly, because talking about mental health isn't enough. We need policies and programs that save lives. Number 3, education and lifelong learning. We celebrate the progress made in girls' education worldwide, but in the process, we've overlooked a growing crisis among boys. Boys are now less likely than girls to finish school in over 100 countries. Boys are dropping out at higher rates, struggling with literacy, and disengaging from learning. In many universities, men are now the minority, yet policies designed to support underrepresented groups often exclude them. The Declaration calls for the following: interventions to improve boys' literacy and engagement. If boys are struggling with reading and learning, we must act early. More male teachers and mentors. When boys see men in leadership roles, they're more likely to stay engaged in school. Fair and equal access to scholarships. No student should be denied an opportunity because of their gender. We fought to open doors for girls. Now, let's make sure we're not closing them for boys. Number 4, family and shared parenting. Fathers matter, not just as financial providers, but as caregivers, role models, and essential figures in their children's lives. Yet too often, our legal system pushes fathers out of their children's lives. Family courts assume mothers should have primary custody, even when fathers are fit and willing to parent. Parental alienation is a real issue, where children are manipulated into rejecting a parent, most often their father. Child support laws can turn fatherhood into a financial obligation rather than a meaningful relationship. The Declaration calls for the following: equal shared parenting laws. When both parents are capable, children should have equal access to both. Removing financial incentives that increase parental conflict. The goal should always be the best interest of the child, not legal battles over money. Recognizing parental alienation as a serious form of child abuse, because no child should be used as a weapon against a loving parent. Stronger families mean stronger societies. When we support fathers, we support families as a whole. Number 5, justice and equality before the law. Justice should be blind. Right now, it's not equal. Men receive harsher prison sentences than women for the same crimes. False allegations ruin innocent lives. In many cases, there's no consequences for making them. Due process is being eroded in cases of domestic and sexual violence, where the accused can be punished without solid evidence. The Declaration calls for the following: upholding due process and presumption of innocence. Justice must be based on fact, not assumption. Ensuring impartial investigations. Every person, man or woman, deserves a fair trial. Addressing sentencing disparities. If men and women commit the same crime, they should face the same consequences. The integrity of our justice system depends upon fairness for all. Number 6, workplace safety and economic opportunity. Every year, thousands of men don't return home from work due to death on the job. Men make up nearly all workplace fatalities. High-risk jobs in construction, transportation, and manufacturing remain male-dominated, but safety regulations often don't focus on men's well-being. At the same time, men face stigma when they enter caregiving roles, such as teaching or nursing. The Declaration commits to the following: stronger workplace safety policies. No job should be a death sentence. Promoting men's access to caregiving careers. A truly equal society encourages men to work in all fields, not just dangerous ones. Number 7, paternal justice and reproductive rights. In every discussion of reproductive rights, one voice is missing: the father's. Men have no say in decisions about embryos they help create. Paternity fraud is real, yet the law often forces men to pay child support even when they're not the biological father. The Declaration calls for fair policies on frozen embryos. If both parents created life, both should have a say in what happens to it. Reforming child support laws. A man shouldn't be forced to support a child that's not his own. Number 8, addressing violence against men and boys. The conversation around violence must include male victims. Men are 78% of homicide victims. Male victims of domestic violence are often ignored. Boys are at a higher risk of child labor, war recruitment, and expectation. The Declaration calls for services for male victims of domestic abuse. No survivor should be turned away based upon gender. Recognition of male victimization in global policies. If we ignore these issues, we fail to protect half of society. Number 9, a fair representation of men and boys in the media. The common saying, toxic masculinity, is offensive and hurtful. The common narrative that most men are abusers, deadbeats, selfish, disposable, and less valuable than women sends a message to boys that they're worthless and their lives are meaningless, resulting in a boy crisis. As Warren Farrell tells us, boys who hurt us. The Declaration calls for a renewed message that men are protectors, builders, and fathers who are the backbone of society. Men doubling over in pain from a shot to the groin is no funnier than a woman suffering in pain. The New York Declaration for men and boys is for families, is for fairness, opportunities, and dignity for all. When fathers are present, children do better. When men succeed, families prosper. 30 years ago, the Beijing Declaration championed women's rights. Today, we add to that legacy, not by progress, but by ensuring that gender equality is truly equality for all. Let's move forward together, men and women, fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, toward a future where no one is left behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Next, pleased to bring you Dr. Edward Bartlett, President of the International Council for Men and Boys, and an unrelenting driving force behind all the progress we've made in the last decade.
Thank you, Rebecca. So it is generally regarded around the world that there is a right to life. And this is signified in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's a broad principle that if a person is not alive, obviously all the other rights simply don't exist because the person is no longer alive. So the right to life is the most important right that anybody can have. Next slide. So the lifespan gender gap is a persistent and global problem. This table in front of you right now, so on the bottom is life expectancy for men, and on the left side is displayed life expectancy for women. So if lifespans were identical in all countries, it would be a perfectly straight line. There would be no variation away from that line, especially above or below that straight line. Well, you can see that in fact that there is significant variation away from that line. If you look carefully in the middle, you might see Russia, and Russia, the 10-year lifespan gender gap. Ukraine also has a 10-year lifespan gender gap. The average around the world is 5 years. On the other hand, in certain countries like Cuba, their lifespan gender gap is only 2 to 3 years. So you can see that this is a very important, and it's a global problem that we're dealing with. So just to look at this in the United States, the states that have a blue color indicates these are states in which the lifespan gender gap is less than 5 years. The states that have purple, which are Nevada, Illinois, and Ohio, their lifespan gender gap is 5 years exactly. And then the remaining red states, the lifespan gender gap is greater than 5 years. So you can see this is, first of all, this is a national problem, but it does vary from state to state for reasons we don't fully understand. So let's ask ourselves, what is being done to address the lifespan gender gap? We'll first look globally, and then we'll look at the United States. So to answer this question, we first look at the World Health Organization, which ostensibly is designed to address the health concerns of all persons, all citizens around the world. So this was a screenshot. First of all, you can do a search for health topics and then look specifically at women's health. So that's what you can see on the screen in front of you. And actually, this is just the first part of a very lengthy, they have numerous reports, they have fact sheets and so forth. I didn't want to bore you with the entire screenshot, but you can see there's a substantial attention by WHO to women's health. Now look at the bottom of the same screen. If you would scroll down a little bit. So then we did a screenshot looking specifically at men's health. So you can see they have information on medicines, meningitis, and then logically, men's health would follow right after meningitis. You can see there is nothing there that addresses the men's health as far as the health topics on the World Health Organization. This is a rather disturbing and stunning, really a stunning disparity. Going to the next slide. What about in the United States? Well, I used to work at the Department of Health and Human Services for 17 years. And at the DHHS, currently there are 7 offices for women's health. And they're in different units or different parts of DHHS. You can see they are all listed here. They all have websites, et cetera, et cetera. But now let's scroll down a little bit more. What about offices of men's health? Surprise, surprise, there is simply 0 offices for men's health. This is a stunning absence about attention to the health of men. So going to the next slide, let's ask the question, well, how have feminists explained this rather disturbing disparity? Well, since the 1990s, feminists have made the claim that women were routinely excluded from medical research. I've included 3 quotes right here. There was an editorial in the leading New England Journal of Medicine, quote, "There is little doubt that women have been systematically excluded as subjects for study. It is not surprising that most clinical trials have been heavily, if not exclusively, weighted towards men." Okay, that's a pretty strong statement. Looking at the last quote there, "The exclusion of some women from clinical studies may sometimes be valid, but not all the women all the time." That's a very strong statement. Let's probe to find out if those statements have any truth to them. So this was an article, and actually I was the author of this article. It was published in a leading epidemiology journal in 2001. And part of the article actually looks at Medline, which is a database for medical research. And I looked just at the number of hits. In other words, the number of times Medline listed a study, and you can see for about 10 different conditions listed on the left side of the page. The number of studies that included men in those studies is the second column. And you can see the total there was over 13,000 studies. Now, this is over a 35-year period. So we're looking at a long period of time. And then the third column is for the number of studies with females that included females. Well, surprise, surprise, not only are there a lot of studies that included women, the number of those studies actually exceed the number of studies that include men. Maybe you're asking why. Well, a lot of the explanation is cancer research has been heavily weighted in favor of women, literally since the beginning that NIH began to do research, the National Institutes of Health. So this is obviously an absolute, completely refutes the claim that women were routinely excluded from medical research. But this narrative has been repeated frequently, and I would say constantly, over the last 35 years. So now there's sort of the sense of, oh, well, we have to make it up. We have to compensate for this alleged exclusion of women. So the most recent analysis looks at the actual overall funding for men's health versus women's health. DHHS funding for men's health, $963 million compared to $5 billion for women's health. And partly that's the cancer disparity, but also other areas. So it's a 5-to-1 margin of funding for sex-specific research. So we have to, look at the conclusion. We have to say that there has been a longstanding neglect of men's health by the World Health Organization, by the Department of Health and Human Services, and in other countries as well that we haven't discussed right now. But I would argue that this exclusion represents a major ethical and a moral stain on the reputations of these groups. This stark imbalance in sex-specific health policies is reminiscent of totalitarian societies in which policies are based not on data, not on science, but rather on ideology. These are the statements in the New York Declaration for Men and Boys. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you can see that the last bullet says we need to establish offices for men's health to address the understudied problems that affect the health of men and boys. So that concludes my comments, and be happy to answer any questions at the end of the conclusion of the press conference. Thank you very much.
Great, Ed, thanks. It's always so interesting, if not shocking sometimes, to actually hear the data and facts on these things when we're so used to hearing the narratives. It's hard to get through your head sometimes, so those facts really help. Next up, we have Ulysses Butch Slaughter will take us on a journey through his deeply personal story. It led him to produce the film series False Allegations 411, which you can find on YouTube. And he is also a special legal assistant at Jafari Law and Mediation in California. Let's hear his perspective on false allegations and society's reaction to guilt simply by accusation.
I am Ulysses Butch Slaughter. I'm honored to be here and participate in this press conference. Though I was born in Chicago, I come to you today having lived most of my adult life near the city of Philadelphia. Once simply called the city of brotherly love, an extension was added in recent years to honor the many valuable and undeniable contributions that women, our sisters, have made and still make in one of our nation's largest and most beautiful cities. Philadelphia is now recognized as the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. Men and women in this new era could have simply decided to continuously criticize Philadelphia's founders for ignoring the contributions of women. What men and women in this new era chose to do instead was to take a shared action to bring balance in the city that birthed our nation's Constitution. Men and women in New York are in New York to call for a course correction regarding the lives of men and boys all around the world. As stated by point 7 of our preamble, we are here celebrating the gains made for girls and women and demanding the same opportunities for boys and men. And as stated in point 9 of the preamble, when men are disadvantaged, it is ultimately harmful to women. We are not here using theories as our truth. Most of us have lived our truth, breathed our truth, and maybe even bled the truth that we speak today. It would be disrespectful for me to talk about the challenges of men and women without talking about my parents, Ulysses Grant Slaughter Sr. and Clarice Joyce Slaughter. I'm obligated to speak their names because I would not be here with you today if it were not for that one man and that one woman. I cannot speak to you today and not be reminded of June 25th, 1978, the day my father shot and killed my mother. My mother and father co-created a madness in our home that would ultimately lead to a murder in Chicago. I was 12 years old. I was in the apartment. I heard the gunshots. I remember standing over my mother. I remember looking at my father. I remember the paramedics taking my mother. I remember the police taking my father. I remember wondering, what next? For decades, I blamed myself for not being man enough to protect my mother. I punished myself. I hated myself. As I stumbled into manhood, I became anti-man. In many ways, I became anti-me. In the name of my mother, Clarice, I decided it would be my life's work to rescue all women. In her name, I would go to battle against all men. I put my mother first. I put all women first. Like my mother, every woman was a potential victim. They were perfect and needed protection. I put my father second. I put all men second. Like my father, every man was a potential villain. They were predators and they needed prisons. I became an asset to domestic violence organizations that sought to protect all women from all men. I was called a domestic violence rock star by women's organizations. The more I talked against men, the more popular I became. In my mind, I was honoring my mother as I clumsily tried to climb a hill that had a new and painful lesson waiting for me at the bottom of this slippery slope. On August 4th, 2021, my ex-wife, Pauline Thompson, made a false allegation of abuse against me in order to initiate a divorce. Pennsylvania State Police came to my home and evicted me. I never suspected that Thompson would treat me with such reckless cruelty. I had no idea such a disgusting legal tactic even existed. As I packed my clothes, I thought about June 25th, 1978. I thought about my mother being carried out by paramedics. I thought about my father being arrested by police. I felt like a 12-year-old child again. I remember wondering, what's next? What happens after that false allegation of abuse is the same thing I experienced as a child. Feelings of betrayal, paranoia, depression, sleepless nights, isolation. As an adult and under these allegations, I would also suffer reputation damage, financial damage, and physical compromise. Seeking guidance and support from my female allies, I reached out to women who once called me a domestic violence rock star. If and when they returned my calls, I got questions like, did you get angry at her? Were you arguing? What did you do? One woman said, maybe you did something and didn't realize you did it. I did nothing to deserve what happened. My crime was being a man caught up in the rigged game of false allegations and domestic violence. I got evicted from my home based on a false allegation, but there were no shelters for men like those that I once visited for women. I was consumed by a cloud of confusion, but there was no free counseling for me. I was about to go broke, but there would be no financial supports for me. On September 9th, 2021, I was handcuffed and arrested and jailed for the very first time in my life. I was being accused of violating a protective order. Ironically, on that same date, just 1 year earlier, on September 9th, 2020, an international observation was launched in England by Lynn Crabtree to bring about awareness to those who have been falsely accused. Ultimately, a judge ruled that I had not violated the protection order on September 9th, 2021. And though I was released from the jail cell, my spirit still feels confined by that false allegation. In the month following my ex-wife's false allegation of abuse, I became obsessed with understanding the world of false allegations. This new world already felt far beyond my comprehension when I came across a story about a social media post by a woman named Emily Linden. In November 2017, Linden, who was editor at Teen Vogue, posted this statement on the platform formerly called Twitter. Linden stated, "I'm not actually at all concerned about innocent men losing their jobs over false sexual assault and harassment allegations. First," she said, "false allegations very rarely happen. So even bringing it up borders on a derailment tactic." She continued, "The benefit of all of us getting to finally tell the truth, plus the impact on victims, far outweigh the loss of any one man's reputation. If some innocent man's reputation have to take a hit in the process of undoing the patriarchy, that is a price I am absolutely willing to pay." Linden's kind of statement is not uncommon. It is a dangerous, broad brushstroke that indicts all men, alleging that they are all guilty of profoundly and simply being men. I'm not actually at all concerned about innocent men losing their jobs over false sexual assault and harassment allegations. I was that innocent man, but according to Linden, I could be used to undo the patriarchy. I was expendable to a movement for which I had once dedicated my life. My service in that movement didn't matter. My fight for my mother didn't matter. My sisters had abandoned me. I was no longer a rock star. I had hit rock bottom. But of course, that's where my recovery began. That's where I got sober around my contribution to my own fall. To be fair, I had never been an overt enemy to men. In fact, I had run fatherhood programs, I had developed rites of passage programs for boys, and I have 4 sons of my own. But in hindsight, I can honestly say I was just going through the motions in my commitments to men and boys. Somewhere in the back of my mind, I believe they already had advantages. So my engagement was lukewarm, lackluster lip service. The months following my ex-wife's allegation made it clear to me that I was still fighting my father's sins, fighting the world through the pain of his action, still fighting my lifelong internal deception that I could have saved my mother. I think about what happened to my mother every day. I hear those 2 gunshots every day. It would take an almost equally opposite and devastating event to help me rebalance my mind around equity for men and women. The false allegation of abuse by my ex-wife was that equally opposite and devastating event. The false allegation was a major and almost mortal shock to my system. The event wasn't something I simply read about. It was now something living and flowing through my veins. What kind of event will it take for us to rebalance the way we have sacrificed men and boys? How many have to suffer? How many have to be falsely accused? Linden said false allegations are very rare. What she should have said is that false allegations are very rarely reported and very rarely punished. Why report a crime if the crime always goes unpunished? Why speak up if you are already being shut down financially, physically, emotionally, and socially? Why speak up? Many men believe it's simply better to shut up about false allegations. Linden said the patriarchy must pay, even if the lives of innocent men are destroyed in the process. What mother wants that reality for her son? What grandmother wants that for her grandson? How long will we pay for our past? How long will we continue to punish one another for the crimes of those who came before us? French philosopher Frantz Fanon stated that each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. I repeat, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. I believe men and women of this generation have an opportunity to embrace the mission of deep and lasting equality for men and women, boys and girls. I believe the mission is far more clear than it is obscure. We can pretend not to see it, but that won't make it less obvious and that won't make it go away. The mission is clear: reconcile the world for men and women, boys and girls. To rephrase the words of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we can learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or we can perish together as fools. Today I ask you, what are we going to do? Thank you.
Thank you. It's tragic, the things that you and others have to go through. And we're so lucky that you can turn that around into something of strength where you can share those experiences with us so we know that they're real, and it combats the narrative and really helps us as much as we can what people like you have gone through. So thanks. And finally today, what happens when families split and shared parenting becomes an issue? Don Hubin is chair of the National Board of the National Parents Organization and board member of the International Council for Equal Shared Parenting. Mr. Hubin, welcome.
Thank you. I was going to start off with some comments about me. Rebecca's already introduced me, so I will skip over this. Perhaps relevant to today's conversation, I'm also the father of 3, the stepfather of 2, and the grandfather of now 6 grandchildren. Just a word or two about National Parents Organization. Our mission is to improve the lives of children and strengthen society by ensuring that every child has a right to the love and care of both parents when the parents separate. We are the nation's largest and most effective shared parenting organization. We have chapters in 37 states, and we work with other organizations in other states as well to advance the shared parenting mission. I describe National Parents Organization as being child-focused and research-based, and what I mean by that is that we ground our advocacy for shared parenting in the best scientific research on child well-being. I want to start by talking about what has recently been labeled the 2-parent privilege. And I don't mean for anything I say to denigrate the work of those parents who are, those single parents who are working hard to raise their children, but it is just a fact that children raised with the active involvement of both parents are less likely to fail in school, less likely to use illegal drugs, less likely to commit crimes, become involved with gangs, to experience sexual assault, to engage in early sexual activity, to become pregnant at an early age, or to die by suicide. There are lots of reasons why children may be deprived of the 2-parent privilege, including the death of a parent, accidents, so forth. But often it's a sort of societal self-inflicted wound by outdated policies for how we handle the parenting of children when parents are living apart. While National Parents Organization is focused on the U.S., this is not a problem restricted to the United States. It is a global problem. The International Council on Shared Parenting, which, as Rebecca said, I serve on the board of, has representatives from 29 states, 29 countries. And what we find is that in countries with very different histories and cultures and legal systems, there's a similar problem of one parent being sidelined when the parents separate. The solution to this is to make shared parenting the norm when parents are living apart. That's the way to get children to benefit from this 2-parent privilege. And that's one of the goals of National Parents Organization in the U.S. and of the International Council on Shared Parenting around the world. So what is shared parenting? Shared parenting involves 2 elements, both legal custody, which has to do with the decision-making responsibility with respect to the children, and physical custody, which has to do with the placement of the children. Shared parenting is a situation where both parents have legal custody and they share in the physical custody. We at NPO and at the International Council of Shared Parenting often talk about equal shared parenting, where the parenting time is divided equally between the 2 parents. Shared parenting matters because shared parenting is a win-win-win arrangement. And I mean by that, it's better for fathers, it's better for mothers, and most importantly, it's better for children. Let me start with the fathers. Being marginalized or sometimes completely erased from their children's lives is detrimental to the health and well-being of fathers. 85% of fathers say that being a parent is the most or one of the most important aspects of who they are as a person, according to the Pew Research Foundation. As 2 researchers put it, a man's life as a father is central, not peripheral to his health. Being sidelined in your children's life has a variety of ill effects on father's health, but perhaps most dramatically, Divorced fathers are 10 times as likely to commit suicide as divorced mothers, and perhaps not coincidentally, they're 10 times less likely to get custody of their children. What about the benefits for mom? Well, the flip side of being a sideline dad is being the overburdened mom. So shared parenting allows mothers to advance their education, to advance their careers, to decompress because child rearing is rewarding, but it can also be challenging, and to develop their personal life. And one researcher in the US found that moms who were practicing equal shared parenting were much more likely to earn more than $100,000 a year than moms who had major custody, and even more so than moms who had sole custody of their children. And they were also much more likely to say that they feel awesome and proud about being a mom. Now, I said it was beneficial for children. We have more than 40 years of research now, which speaks as univocally as research ever does, that in the vast majority of cases, it's to the benefit of children to have both parents equally involved. And it's important to underscore that this is true regardless of the parental income or educational levels of the parents. This is not a phenomenon that's a result of parents who choose to do shared parenting being parents who have higher education and higher incomes. It's a benefit to children regardless of the parental income and educational levels. It's also beneficial to children even when the parents don't initially both agree to shared parenting, which is an important point because sometimes courts say if they can't agree to shared parenting, they can't work under a shared parenting plan. That is false. It's also beneficial to children when there is nonviolent conflict between the parents. And it's beneficial even for infants and toddlers. And the closer the split is to 50-50, the better it is for children. So let me start with the closer to 50-50 being beneficial to children. Sometimes people say, well, it's not the quantity of parenting time that matters, it's the quality that matters. And of course, the quality of parenting time is vital, but the quantity matters as well. Children who enjoy equal time with both parents have secure attachments to both parents, which leads to a better outcome for the children. Sometimes people say, shared parenting is great, but there shouldn't be any legal presumption because every case is different. Let the courts do whatever they think is in the best interest of the children. But children benefit not just from the practice of shared parenting, but from there being a legal presumption of shared parenting. As researcher William Fabricius puts it, the evidence that's now available is compelling that failure to enact presumptions of equal shared parenting risk unnecessary harms to children's emotional security with their parents and consequently unnecessary harm to public health in the form of long-term stress-related mental and physical health problems among children of divorce. Now, some have raised concerns about presumptions of shared parenting, worrying that they might increase the incidence of family violence, both intimate partner violence and child maltreatment. Fortunately, the evidence shows exactly the opposite. Kentucky passed its presumption of equal shared parenting as a result of the efforts of my colleague Matt Hale at NPO back in 2017 for temporary orders and for permanent orders in 2018. Data from the Kentucky Administrative Office of the Courts show that the incidence of civil domestic and family cases cross-referenced with domestic violence cases dropped by half between 2017 and 2022, from 973 to 454. And here's a graphic representation of those data. There is 2017, where we had 973 incidences. And in 2022, it had dropped to less than half of that. Spain provides us with the best evidence about the effects of presumptions of shared parenting on intimate partner violence. Spain presents something very rare in social sciences. It presents a natural experiment. Around 2010, 5 juridical regions in Spain adopted legal reforms that increased shared physical custody by fourfold in just 5 years. What the researchers found looking at this was the policy significantly decreased domestic violence. Survey data indicates that intimate partner violence falls by almost 50% after the policy change. And there was also evidence of a significant reduction in the number of female homicides committed by intimate partners at this time. And this is the researcher's graphic representation of those data. The blue line represents those regions of Spain where they adopted presumptions of shared physical custody, the red line where they did not. What about child maltreatment? Well, I mentioned that Kentucky instituted its presumptions of equal shared parenting during temporary orders in 2017 and for final orders in 2018. The neighboring state of Ohio, my home state, presents a marked contrast with Kentucky. During that period, the number of child victims in Ohio dropped by 2.5%, which you might think is something we're celebrating until you look at what happened in Kentucky. It dropped by almost a third, by 33.2% in Kentucky during that same period. And there's a representation of those data, all those data from HHS. We also have evidence from within Ohio, because as I mentioned, Ohio doesn't have a statewide presumption of equal shared parenting, but state law does require each of the counties to have a local parenting time rule. And so in 2022, NPO did a study of all Ohio's 88 counties, grading them on their local parenting time rule, giving grades in the A range to those counties that had presumptions of equal or almost equal parenting time, and grades in the D range to those counties that had the every other weekend schedules. And then in 2023, we correlated those data with the data about child maltreatment derived from the Department of Health and Human Services by the Annie E. Casey Kids Count project. And here's what we found. There's a very strong correlation between those counties that had presumptions of equal shared parenting and those that didn't. The counties with equal or nearly equal shared parenting rules had consistently lower and decreasing rates of child maltreatment. The child maltreatment cases dropped by more than 50% in the equal shared parenting counties. And there's a graphic representation of those data. The red line represents those counties that adopted presumptions of equal parenting time. The blue line is the statewide average, and the green line are those counties that had every other weekend and one evening a week schedule. Now, why do child maltreatment cases drop when there's presumption of shared parenting? Well, we don't really know. More research is necessary. It's pretty obvious why intimate partner violence might drop, because you assure both the parents that they're going to continue to be fully involved with their children, and that reduces the conflict between the parents. We don't know for sure why child maltreatment drops. It could be that by sharing the child rearing responsibilities more equally, neither parent feels overburdened, and that feeling of being overburdened might lead some parents to be violent towards their children. It could also be that having both parents fully engaged means that there's sort of a check, and if there's some minor violence towards the children, it'll be caught more early. It could be that by freeing the courts from handling contentious child custody cases, the courts have more time to focus on child maltreatment cases and stop it from getting serious earlier on. We don't know. More research is necessary. What we do know is that presumptions of equal shared parenting reduce both intimate partner violence and child maltreatment. Of course, courts need to do a good job identifying parents who are violent towards the other parent or towards the children, and they need to protect potential victims in those cases. But for those cases where both parents are safe parents, presumptions of equal shared parenting are beneficial with respect to intimate partner violence and with respect to child maltreatment. So the International Council for Men and Boys is focused on addressing a wide variety of problems that confront men and boys. The way we handle separated parenting is a major cause of problems for men and boys, for fathers and their children. The good news is that solving this problem benefits not only men and boys, but women and girls as well. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you. So as we bring this conversation to a close, I want to take a moment to reflect on what we've heard today. Our speakers highlighted critical gaps in the global approach to gender equality, gaps that for too long have left men and boys out of the discussion. We've examined how disparities in education, mental health, legal systems, and family life continue to affect men and those around them. And most importantly, we've acknowledged that addressing these challenges is not about taking away from anyone. It's about building a more balanced, fair, and inclusive society for all. The New York Declaration for Men and Boys represents more than just an idea. It's a necessary step toward real lasting change. And I'd like to open the floor now. If anyone has questions or comments for our speakers, now's your time. To do that, you'll see a button in the middle of your Zoom screen at the very bottom. It says react and shows a heart. So you click that, and then at the very bottom of that pop-up, click where it says raise your hand, and I'll call on you. Hopefully you can please unmute yourself as well. Oh, okay. Yes, go right ahead, Coach.
Yes, thank you. I'm really appreciative for being here, and I want to acknowledge, appreciate the men who spoke today about their situation and the data that they acquired, the information that they shared with us today. It's really eye-opening, it's really impactful, it's inspiring, it's motivating. So I just wanted to thank those guys that spoke today. Thank you.
Definitely take strength and courage to share past experiences, and it at least can translate into something good for the rest of us. Is, we need to hear those stories to hear that they're real. Okay, we have someone else here, Carl from Colorado. How are you?
Hey, doing well, thank you. I mean, just again, I'm gonna reiterate just what Coach Kai said. Ed, Larry, Don, Ulysses, that is just incredible work. Just thank you so much for bringing all this together. Incredible, everybody. Thank you.
Really were great presentations. Glenn, see your hand is raised.
Yes. Well, thank you. And thank Don Hubin for a marvelous, very comprehensive, but surprisingly brief summary of the overwhelming evidence for equal shared parenting. And I'm hoping that his presentation will be made available so that we can adapt it for use in other nations such as Canada.
Or we can connect you on that for sure. Thank you. And Ola, see you raising your hand as well.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca. Thank you, everyone. I'm joining in from Africa, Nigeria to be precise. And this is a time that I believe is necessary. It has come. I want to appreciate everyone who put this together. It's a movement that is necessary. It's a declaration that is long overdue. And we are happy this is happening today. I want to appreciate everyone who has spoken, Wessex, Larry, Ed. We love this movement. I want to say thank you.
Thank you. It's good to hear from people even far away. That really helps the overall movement. And I know, Ed, you wanted to make a comment.
Yes, Ed Bartlett here. I want to thank Don here for the presentation, and I want to point out a very interesting similarity here. Over and over again, we saw a 50% reduction. In Kentucky, it was about a 50% reduction in domestic violence. In Spain, it was a 50% reduction in domestic violence. And then in that comparison in Ohio, again, it was remarkable, about a 50% reduction in child maltreatment. I think this is a pretty astonishing finding in 3 different studies in 2 different countries.
Yeah, it's, again, the data, the facts. I think that's what we need to combat some of the ideology and the narratives that just don't portray reality. So yeah, very helpful. And I think, Peter, you had your hand up next.
Yeah, I would like to thank Don and Larry and Edward, first of all, also from Europe. I recognize much of the figures, but they were revealing anyway to have them so documented. And I would like to ask if they will help us make the same picture for Europe, because we are no different. The problem is here just as big. And I hope they will help us document it in a fragmented continent where it's very difficult to get these figures together. Okay, that was it.
Thank you. And again, from overseas, from us here in America. And looks like we also have the African Boy Child Network raising a hand. I don't know if you're familiar with unmuting, but up at the top there, you should have a button to unmute yourself. Yep. Hi, welcome.
Thank you. My name is Rosemary Kinuthia from African Boy Child Network. Thumbs up to the different speakers that we've had. I know our setup is perceived to be a little bit different because a lot of times Africa is accused of being a patriarchal society. But unfortunately, we take in a lot of good, bad, and ugly from your place. And it seems the ugly comes in full force. So finally, we are actually struggling right now on issues of fatherless children. And for instance, Kenya, I think, is the leading African country with single mothers. And that, according to what we've heard today from the speakers, 95% of all incarcerated youth are actually boys. And majority of them are actually from single mothers. So I totally agree with the speakers. And we hope that we can actually keep this momentum going. Because I think at the end of the day, it's either we save all of us or all of us sink. And we are happy and we are grateful to be part of this movement. Thank you.
Oh, and we're so glad to have you too. It's good to have that perspective and to see that this isn't just unique to one area. It's something that pertains worldwide for sure.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Hubin, looks like you have your hand raised.
I wanted to respond to Peter. As Peter knows, but maybe others don't, National Parents Organization has twice in the past published a shared parenting report card in 2014 and 2019. And we are preparing to publish a shared parenting report card in 2025, actually April 23rd. Watch for it. We will have a press conference on a shared parenting report card for the United States. But we've also been working with the International Council on Shared Parenting, which Peter is also on, to do a shared parenting report card for Europe. So the International Council on Shared Parenting.
I'm very involved in that. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, I know you are, Peter. This was for the benefit of the others. So you asked if this could be extended to Europe, and that's one way in which I think we are extending this to Europe. And certainly the research that's been done on intimate partner violence and child maltreatment is something that is appropriate to use in every country in advancing the cause of shared parenting.
Thank you.
Felix wanted to say something, Rebecca, if we could.
Okay, sure. Felix.
Good morning or good afternoon, folks. No, I'm not Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I'm Felix Leo Campos. And to the group, I'm really appreciative of the stand in challenging the stigmas and the stereotypes, because most, if not all, of the father support groups that I found here in New York would rather take the stand of helping dads to navigate the system, as it were, and getting them even further involved in the stereotypes and the injustices. But I wanted to ask, besides domestic violence and the stigma and the stereotype of men as being abusers, what of reproductive rights? Why are abortions above the privilege of a father, of a man, to have the equal privilege to choose to be a father to their children rather than being spat out like phlegm from a bad cold? So that was my comment, but I want to thank you all as a group for the challenging stand that helps to bring gender equality to the issue of men and women and parenthood.
I think that topic is being discussed more and more these days, yet nothing has changed, of course. I don't know if anyone has any comments on Felix's comments there.
I certainly feel Felix's and men's pain in that issue. However, we would like to stay away from politically charged topics that really divide the entire globe. We really want to unify, and that's why we keep anything related to abortion separate from what we're doing. We're talking about reproductive rights that involve these other issues that are mentioned in the document that we believe are inarguable, but abortion can really let off a firestorm that we're trying to avoid. But I appreciate Felix's sentiment.
Great. So let's continue on. I think David Walsh, you have your hand up.
Right. I would like to put a question to Don. I found Don's talk extremely interesting, but as I sense it, some objections are being made today to shared parenting on the grounds that when the parents live a considerable distance apart, it makes it much more difficult to do shared parenting. And we are also living at a time when housing is in very short supply. So that when parents separate, the one or other of the parent may be forced to live a very great distance away from the other parent. And this also can be make it difficult to share the parenting. What does Don have to say about those kinds of objections?
Well, thank you, David, for that question. Of course, what we advocate for is a rebuttable presumption of equal shared parenting, and there are a variety of factors that can rebut it. Of course, if one parent is a danger to the children, that would be something that would rebut it. But sometimes much more mundane things will rebut the presumption. If parents live very far apart, that just the travel time can make it impossible for them to both be equally involved in the children's lives. So, those sorts of things are factors that can serve to rebut the presumption. That doesn't mean that you will completely sideline the one parent. There are ways of handling that with extended time when the children aren't in school and so forth. But if you have a presumption of equal shared parenting, that can provide parents with an incentive to try to stay close to one another so that they can raise the children in an equal shared parenting arrangement. So I don't know, David, whether that answered your question. It's certainly there can be those factors that make it impossible to do equal shared parenting. But whenever it is possible, it's best for the children. And so the court should be deciding things in that way.
Thank you for that, Don.
Thank you. Looks like that's the last of the questions and comments. So I want to thank you, all of our incredible speakers, for sharing your insights, and all of you for engaging in this vital discussion, because change doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens when people like you step up and speak out and demand better. In recent weeks, we have had 7 meetings with UN ambassadors and staffers in New York City, all with positive response, and our declaration will be formally in the hands of the UN Secretary General. So let's continue this momentum beyond today. This conversation isn't over, and the movement for true gender equality is just beginning.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you, everybody who joined us this morning and afternoon. We appreciate your attention, your advocacy. Rebecca, back to you.
I think that wraps it up. Thank you, Larry. Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Yeah.